Hey folks, David Watts here. Usually I'm behind the camera showing you some of the ways I edit photographs with Luminar. And we'll be back to some of those videos soon, but I thought today I'd offer a special treat. I'd go on this side of the camera and talk to you just a little bit, my review of the new Fuji X-H1. Just came in the mail today, and I have to say a big congrats to Adorama. I previously had the order placed with B&H Photo, and they've been good, but seemed a little slow on my past couple of orders to get things shipped. So on Friday, I saw that it was available from Adorama and it was shipping. Quickly canceled my B&H order. I quickly ordered from Adorama, and it was here Monday, today. No cost, UPS overnight. So fantastic service. So anyway, just wanted to give a shout out there. Anyway, I wanted to give you my sense of the Fuji X-H1, as well as give a couple of tips for how you can get the most out of it. So you probably know a lot about the X-H1 already if you're a Fujifilm shooter. It is essentially the same image quality as the X-T2, the same sensor, the same basic processor. Now, some folks have suggested maybe the high ISO performance is a little bit better, and that could be the case. I think time will tell on that, but basically just assume same image quality and same sensor. But there are some key differences. Number one, the focusing is much snappier and just generally better. I find eye tracking especially seems to be better. A lot of the kind of photography I do is nighttime portrait work. Just using available lighting, you can get some really great effects. In fact, here's an image that I took just this evening with my son. We went up to the little town just north of us. This is not an extremely demanding shot. It's 1/60th of a second, ISO 3200, and it is with my XF 90mm lens, however. That's an f2 lens, and it's a fantastic lens, fabulous quality, but no image stabilization. So typically on the X-T2, this would be a tough shot to get it sharp. Maybe 1 out of 10, maybe fewer than that would be really sharp at 1/60th of a second. But this was 1/60th, and because of the image, in-body image stabilization, great quality, great sharpness, and that gives you a little sense of what's possible. But I do a lot of the nighttime portrait work like that. And the focusing, it wasn't perfect, but it was better than the X-T2, and that's always a challenging condition where you've got a lot of lights, a lot of glare, a lot of challenges there, low light conditions. The Fujis probably struggle a little bit in that. Probably all of the mirrorless cameras struggle a little bit in those kind of dark conditions, but the X-H1 did better and is more precise. When I did some shooting earlier today outside, I found the eye tracking was better and crisper and just faster than previously with the X-T2. So you'll have that to look forward to. Better focusing. The ergonomics, I think, are great. It is a bigger camera, as you have seen, and you can probably see here, but it seems to fit just perfectly. As soon as I picked it up, I liked it. It is a little bit heavier, but it fits, and the grip is handy, and it feels comfortable even one-handed, whereas previously with the X-T2, there just wasn't as much to hold on to. So ergonomics are great. In-body image stabilization, the IBIS, and that's sort of the headline on this camera. And it is fantastic. And what it allows is you to use lenses that have no optical stabilization. So if you do the kind of portrait work I like to do, nighttime available light photography, you don't have great lighting conditions. The XF 90mm is fantastic, but it needs a fair amount of light because of the long focal length, and it can get shaky. The 50mm f2, if you use that for some portrait work at night, or certainly the 56mm f1.2, those are great portrait lenses, but none of them have image stabilization. Well, now they do because of in-body image stabilization. So I was doing a little bit of testing just inside the house earlier, in somewhat dim lighting conditions. And I'll say more about this with auto ISO in just a moment. But I was able to push it with my XF 90mm lens. I was able to get sharp results down to about 1/10 of a second. So that's impressive to me, because ordinarily you would use sort of the reciprocal and say, well, 90mm lens, I need at least 1/100th of a second, or 1/125th, or 1/150th. Some people prefer 1/200th. because the 90mm lens is a little bit challenging in that regard. But to go all the way down to 1/10 of a second, that's impressive. Now, that's not going to help you with portrait work because people are going to be moving and shaking and so forth and breathing. But for stills, that opens up some new possibilities. So, anyway, by my calculation, that's about maybe a four stops worth of image stabilization. And let me connect that to what I wanted to say about auto ISO. And that we'll get into a couple of the tips here that I'd suggest at this point with the X-H1 for getting the most out of it if you buy one. Number one, a lot of us like to shoot with auto ISO. So we'll say, low range of 200 ISO up to 3200. And the minimum shutter speed in our Fuji cameras can be specified. You can specify, I want a minimum shutter speed of 1/30th of a second or 1/60th of a second. You can also specify auto for that. And the Fuji camera figures out, based on the focal length, kind of using that rough estimation of the reciprocal value of the shutter speed, of the focal length, to set the floor. So for example, on my X-T2 and on the X-H1, and this is the point I want to make, with the XF 90mm, when I set the floor for the shutter speed to be auto, the camera sets that floor to be 1/125th of a second. If you think about it for a moment, that's perfectly legitimate, maybe even a little slow when you don't have any stabilization going on. But this is a camera with stabilization. So the point I want to make is you may be well served to go in and take that off of auto in terms of the slowest shutter speed and move that down to 1/30th of a second or 1/15th of a second. It depends on the kind of things you're shooting, of course, but if you're doing portrait work, you can probably go down to 1/60th of a second, maybe even 1/30th of a second. But just know that the camera does not yet adjust for the fact that image stabilization can bring that minimum shutter speed way down. And maybe it shouldn't adjust for it because it doesn't know the kind of shooting we're doing, whether it's moving objects or exactly what we want. But just know you can go change that and set that floor to something more realistic if you can handle it for your subject. Again, portraits, you're not going to get away with 1/10 of a second or 1/15th of a second. You might can do 1/30th or 1/60th